Welcome to Occupations, the podcast, where we discuss what it's like to hold specific jobs. Occupations is brought to you by lotsofmaps.com, where you fulfill your vintage map gifting needs. Visit lotsofmaps.com.
Hi, and welcome to Occupations, the podcast. I'm Andy Jagalinzer. I have a great guest for you this month, Virginia Heffernan. She is a journalist and a staff writer at the New Republic, and she's going to join us and tell us a little bit about journalism. Hi, Virginia.
Hey, Jag. Can I call you Jag?
Yes, you can.
I feel like it seems so swingy and, I don't know, it seems like Ocean's 11 or something.
Yes,
hey, Jag.
that was me.
I'm Hef.
I'm the getaway driver.
You're the getaway driver.
Yeah.
I like that. Can I be the major thief, the main one that has to do the main, physical acts of stealing jewels?
You have to be agile. And
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome.
All right.
You're in. All right. We gotta get a crew together. So let's start at the beginning. What is a journalist and what is a staff writer at the New Republic?
Yeah. So a journalist is someone who tries to produce the first draft of history. So pretty soon after things happen in the world, we try to make a first pass how this event, how the situation might be understood by generations to come. So ours is the first draft. And then the staff writer is someone like me on contract at a magazine or a newspaper who produces a certain number of pieces of journalism a year, in my case, 42 columns of about 800 words each that run in the New Republic on politics. All
right. Now you need to explain what a newspaper and a magazine is. I kid.
Oh, you're so right. Right. They're like things. Oh, God, how could I compare them? They're like hard. They're like TikTok, but hard and not moving.
Right. Okay.
Is that maybe something like that?
It's the internet on trees.
That's the internet on trees.
There you go.
That's it. Yeah, that's a great way to think of it.
All right. So let's start at the beginning. Let's go right back to where did you grow up, Virginia?
I grew up in Hanover, New Hampshire, where Dartmouth College is. My father was a professor there. And I went to the public high school there, Hanover High School.
Great. What did your dad teach?
He taught English. English literature, with a special focus on some Irish writers, including James Joyce, who wrote Ulysses.
Excellent. So do you feel like, right off the bat, I'm going to ask you, feel like that was an influence on you, your dad, as far as becoming a journalist?
Yes. Now, crazily enough, I followed very closely in my father's footsteps for the first part of my career. I sort of imagined I'd become like he was, a professor. And I ended up doing a PhD in English the way he had, although he worked on English poets to start with, and I worked on American novelists. So see, I was very rebellious. I didn't just do exactly what he did. But soon after, I realized that I wanted to write something slightly more immediate, and I wanted to live in New York, and I wanted to be able to respond to events as they happened instead of writing books for a much smaller audience.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's go from there. Hanover. So you grew up, you had a father who was influential as far as what he did for a living. Did you know at an early age that was possibly the track you wanted to take?
In addition to having this very bookish household, there was another big influence on me, and that is an influence that's pretty rare for people my age, and that was the internet, which surprisingly, through a kind of strike of lightning, appeared in my town in the 1970s. So I've had people say, well, the word internet did not exist in the 70s, and they're right. What it was a node of a early networked computing system that was in the town of Hanover. And townies like me could dial in from our phones, so even a regular rotary phone.
Not a cell phone, everybody. Not a cell phone.
Right. A landline, copper wire landline with rotary, dial. We could dial in and get kind of what sounded like a fax signal, then push it into a coupler, which is like kind of like a kayak with like two suction cups on it that you push your phone into. That sends a signal to a computer that like doesn't have anything in it. It used to be called a dumb terminal, but it's sort of like a Chromebook, so it doesn't have any life in it until it's networked. Then you'd get on it, and in my case, I did what kids now do, joined a kind of proto-social network and ended up socializing, playing kind of D&D style games, and otherwise kind of coming of age in a space that wouldn't be familiar to people for another almost 30 years.
So was that a test?
Was interesting. A test?
Was it sort of a trial?
Like a pilot?
Yeah, pilot.
Yeah. So, I mean, your listeners and you have probably heard of ARPANET, which was one of the early kind of military projects to aid in the creation of the internet. And this was in the ARPANET era, but that was in California. This was mostly on the East Coast. And the president of Dartmouth at the time was one of the authors of the computer language BASIC, which people probably know now mostly from Visual Basic, but it was a huge breakthrough in natural language computer coding. And because he had invented this and worked with Einstein and needed to be sort of conned into coming up to like small remote Hanover to run Dartmouth College, what they told him was that he would be able to install a mainframe, which is essentially a hub for network computing when he got there. And he did. And in exchange, I guess, for the real estate, in exchange for, taking up this colonial town with this big mainframe, he offered to give lectures to the school children. And I was one of those school children.
Wow.
And I sat in a lecture from John Kameny, and he explained how BASIC worked. And then he also told us how we could join this computer network. And as usual, it was like me and a couple of really nerdy boys were like, this sounds awesome. And so we joined up, and that's how I got on the internet.
On the fringe. Wow. Way ahead of the rest of us. Yeah, I don't think I'd even heard of a computer when I was your age. Certainly back in the 70s. Although I got to say, I had my Commodore 64 in the 80s, and
good for you.
I did do BASIC. I remember go to and run and I'm
and it could say like happy birthday Jag or whatever at the end,
and that's about it. That's about all I could do,
but it still seemed amazing.
It certainly did. Were you writing at the time or no?
Yes, so that's why there were these sort of two to three influences. So one of them was like just normal wholesome outdoorsy life that from my cousins, which I there was plenty of in New England. Then from my dad, there was a lot of emphasis on literature and reading and writing. So I was writing especially a lot of poetry, short stories, more fiction and poetry than I have ultimately done with my life, but that was especially poetry. And then the last influence was the internet, which really amazed me about the possibilities of tech and really seemed like just being in the future. Just dialed into the future. And I still feel great comfort with and interest in digital tech and networked computing.
That's amazing. I mean, you're one of the very few that can say that they did that because you're way ahead of everybody else in that curve. So how old are we talking about with your writing? And did you share your writing with others at that time?
So I started, I think when I was a freshman in high school, we went to Italy for the summer, and I sort of talked the local newspaper into letting me write letters back from Italy to the newspaper. I have no idea how they did it, the Valley News, or why they did it. And that was something. And then I also just seemed to have, like, my brother teases me about this, but I just seemed to have a knack for like giving quotes to report. Like I was just somehow always on hand when reporters showed up to take with quotes or pictures. And so, I mean, just silly things like I worked at a movie theater, and the night it opened, they took a picture of someone selling tickets and it was on the front page of the newspaper. That was me. You might recognize me. And then another time I was putting flags on the graves of veterans, foreign fallen soldiers, and on Memorial Day in my brownie uniform. Also made A1. My
Wow.
brother is, as you know, like he's like way more captivating than I am. But he was like, you just wormed your way onto the front page whenever you could.
You're like the firefighter who sets fires and then becomes a
Oh
hero
my
for putting them out,
I
right?
think that's right. In fact, we had a fire in our house, and that was another time I got to give a quote. Um, but I also, yeah, for some reason, sending stuff off to be published just seemed like sort of normal, and I got plenty of things turned down. But then I started publishing poetry in little journals, including, well, I don't know. I got a book of like, where is it possible to publish poetry?
Hmm.
And sent to a journal called Prairie Schooner. I started publishing a little bit there. And then when I got to college, I just started writing for all the literary magazines and newspapers that I could, you know, possibly sell my stuff to or place my stuff in.
Right. Uh,
I guess they weren't paying in those days.
right. I know you probably don't get rejected much these days, but as a kid being turned down for publishing or whatever, how did you handle that as a kid? Was that okay, or did that get you down?
It's less difficult to have a piece rejected, I think, than to have a piece killed. So the difference is rejected, you might either pitch a story and, the place says that's not for us,
Hmm.
or you sort of write it, as they say, on spec. So you write it completely, you hand it to them, and
Mm.
you do this with poetry, and they're like, oh, not for us. That, for some reason, is less painful than they assign you something,
Hmm.
right? And they say like, oh, this is going to be great. Yes, you should go do this. Write this thing about the metaverse. I think I remember I did something for Business Insider, and I wrote it. I liked it. I turned it in, and they were like, I don't know that we can make this work at all. Like,
Ooh,
we can't do anything with this.
ouch.
And then you get what's dreadfully called a kill fee, just like a tiny percentage, like 50% or 25% of what you would have made
Yeah.
had it run, but you've done just as much work. And also, then you really feel like you've let the person down, you know,
Yeah. Right.
where the other thing is like, I guess, I don't know how, but I always just thought that there's this sales manual. When I wrote my dissertation, I was looking at it from the 20s that salesmen in America would carry with them as they made their rounds to sell whatever, watches or vacuum cleaners. And the book says it just meant to inspire salesmen to be confident. And it's the end of one of the chapters ends, know your goods are good goods
Hmm.
and they will sell.
Hmm.
And I was like, I don't know why, but I feel like I've always known my goods are good goods.
All
I
right.
have no idea why that's true. And
That's
it's
confidence.
like, I know things don't look that great, but I'm going to secretly believe that they are that great.
Right.
I don't know if that's strategic. And I also think sometimes it works to my disadvantage. I know confidence it can be sort of a double-edged sword. Like, like in college once I left like I was like in an ice cream place, and I just started mixing it up with the person selling ice cream. And as we were leaving, I said like a cheerful goodbye to them. And the a great friend of mine who became a co-author, Mike, said, you think those people really liked you, right? And I was like, yes. And he said, they didn't. They thought you were really annoying. I was like, oh my God, I just assumed that they thought I was great. Oh, well.
Well, that's good. I mean, especially in that circumstance where it doesn't really matter what they think, right? As long as you feel
Yeah,
that way. But
I
yeah,
guess so. I mean,
that's
you could probably make some mistakes, like just
sure.
think that you're really getting along with someone and then find out they were ready to fire you or whatever. But and I'm sure that's happened to me.
Yeah.
The dispositional kind of tendency to be hopeful or know my goods are good goods feels
Yeah.
sort of hardwired.
Yeah. I mean, you're an optimist and you believe in yourself, and that's great. I love that. Even as a kid, you
Yeah,
felt that way. That's really great. Let's talk about college. I assume you finished high school up. Anything happen as a big event in high school as far as writing is
I
concerned?
was not, I wouldn't describe myself as a good kid. I wasn't not drinking. Let's just put it that way, or trying drugs. Um, so that was another part of me. I think that the time on the internet had really exposed me to older people and also to a more sort of full contact raunchy way of being because just like then, just like now, there are parts of the internet that are closer to like the id, they're closer to the like darker parts of human nature.
Right.
And so when I jumped off the internet, I was like all too willing to go to the local fraternity parties and just get myself in all kinds of trouble. That said, I also did keep up the writing, and those two things merged in some ways. I mean, I feel like it's hard to be a good student, at least the whole like acing the SATs and perfect handwriting and sit in the front of the class,
Mm,
and also write in a uninhibited way.
sure.
So like we didn't have ChatGPT, obviously, but the way that we were expected to write essays was a little bit robotic, and that didn't fit with maybe this other side of me.
Right.
So the writing was not so much a school exercise, although I think I wrote some pretty good stuff in Shakespeare class or in something else, but it was mostly extracurricular.
Hmm.
So I sent those things to the Valley News. I just liked places where my voice could be freer.
Sure.
When you're doing research papers in high school and college, those require research, which is mostly consulting books or probably now just the internet. As a journalist, you're doing reporting, so you want to be out in the world. It's very hard to do like, get in your car and go somewhere. And so I liked that. I like to travel. So I also did that on the weekends. For physics class, I wrote showing how not good I was at physics. I wrote about people who can see auras, like to see if there was any kind of physics to the like human color that people that like mystics and hippies can see around people. And that was just an excuse to get to go to this dowsing convention of just dowsers, like people who use dowsing rods. It was also turned out to be like a meeting for twins and dwarfs who felt that they had magical powers and a language that they could speak with each other. And it was just this crazy cool convention of like people who love crystals and people who do dowsing and people who see auras and tarot, and that became really fascinating. And so I wrote a lot about that outside of the totally harebrained idea that this could be a physics project. Um, but going to that convention was that was a really nice memory of reporting because I do love asking people a million questions, a million intrusive, annoying questions. That's the name of the game for
That's me too, by the way, but I don't actually do anything with it. Um,
You do this show.
well, I
And it's
guess that's
great.
true. I guess that's true. Wow. Well, and all of this is what you're talking about, the not drinking. I mean, all of that is, makes you more worldly, right? You're looking at things from different perspectives. And if you just took the same path and were the same person over and over again, you'd be pretty boring.
Yeah, I think that the other thing is that you and I were talking about having been born at the very end of the 60s. But if you grew up with the Beats or some of the writers of the 60s or Tom Wolfe or Norman Mailer at all in your head, or an idea that writers were Kerouac were like dropouts who got in cars,
Right.
which is sort of what I thought they were, that they were like kind of closer to like weird troubadours
Hmm.
than to well-behaved high school students.
Right.
I wanted some of that for myself.
Hmm.
So I would read like just read a lot about Sylvia Plath or read a lot about Kerouac and kind of
Right.
wild writers that had gone before,
Hmm.
in the decades before, because you always idolize those periods.
I always think of Good Will Hunting when he talks
Yeah.
about, yeah, okay, so you've read about all of this stuff, but do you know what it smells like in the Louvre? Things like that. Are you
Yeah.
experiencing the world, or are you just reading about the world?
Yeah.
And that's amazing. That's terrific. All right, so you finish up high school. Where are you doing your undergrad?
I went to the University of Virginia, and I'll tell you why.
Because of your name.
Because of exactly. I just wanted the sweatshirt because and there's nothing less annoying than someone who just wears their own name on a sweatshirt. The ice cream shop guy loves me for that. Um, I went there because, and this is where things in my life get political, I had 1987, I had been really interested in these protests going on at Dartmouth about the endowment of Dartmouth College, which was invested then in South African equities.
Mm.
And I was part of the movement to get it to divest. By part of the movement, I mean I spent some time in the shanty towns where they were protesting.
Mm.
And somehow, as right wingers, the same way campus right wingers, the same way the anti activists are like dominating campuses now, they were present then too. And they really made themselves felt in the form of these counter protests that I thought, to my infinite shame now, were very clever.
Mm.
So there may have been a campus personality who might recently have been assassinated, who is slightly like the people that I encountered in 87. But unlike now, where I might have been like, those people are racist weirdos, I was enchanted. It was
Mm.
like the Reagan era, and it seemed like they were, going to leave the Carter days or the hippie days behind.
Mm.
And that seemed exciting to me. So when I went to choose a college, I came down between the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Virginia. There were reasons to go to UVA apart from what I'm about to say, but ultimately I chose it on the fact that I thought it was a more conservative campus.
Mm.
And the University of Pennsylvania was in Philadelphia. I thought Philadelphia was scary and huge. I was from a tiny town, and I went to the University of Virginia on the grounds that it would be Southern, it would be conservative. It might, I also wanted, I don't know if you ever had this, but I wanted to distance myself from my bad old ways because I had just partied so hard. And I was like, I'm going to get my shit together and I'm going to go and be good. And I felt like I could be good if I was like around more conservative people.
Mm.
Anyway, I arrive at UVA, and one of the first things that happens is that there's something that was then called Jeans Day. And Jeans Day, you were supposed to wear jeans, wear denim, if you vaguely supported the right of gay people to exist. And I had grown up around a lot of gay people, and that seemed like sort of a no-brainer. So I put on jeans and went out to campus, and the campus was a sea of fraternity guys in Madras. Right. So that summery, awesome, very non-jeans fabric. And it was just one of those stunts that we can recognize now as just the kind of weird cruelty and hatred that people in groups can somehow decide is funny. And I was so crushed. And then mixed in with people using the N-word, that I was just like, I've made a terrible, terrible mistake. The upside of that is that I was like, the social life here is not for me. These people are not cool and they're stupid and they red cups and whatever. And I hate this thing. So I'm going to find a new life for myself. And that life, sadly, is going to have to be at the library. So unlike in high school, I was like my place of last resort. Just like I would have, if I felt like the fraternities were cool, I would have totally been a groupie.
Sure.
But I just decided that they weren't. And so my life took this turn where I was in the library a lot and then off campus at places that were like where they had more trans people and drag queens and like these cool sushi bars. And basically I just tacked completely against everything that I had gone to UVA
Right.
for, which was the tradition. And
Were you
then,
purposely going
yeah.
that direction, like against what they were doing, just because you wanted to feel, I don't know, clean?
Dress like clean of the racism and
Yeah.
the, yeah. Yes. I also just felt like just profoundly uncomfortable and sad. And like they used lynching imagery. I mean,
Mm,
I think listeners could think of, or you might think of like a Matt Gaetz or a Marjorie Taylor Greene vibe.
yeah.
Just so not like bothering to me in a snowflakey way, although that might have been part of it, but also like, oh my God, this can't be the way life is going to be. There
Yeah.
must be something else. But they sort of blotted out the sun when it came to social life. It
Mm,
was like that or nothing, or it felt like that. So the reason that I like started to go to other bars or hang out with different kind of people is not because I was so awesomely rebellious, but because I needed friends at all,
yeah. Right.
and the friends were people that I met in class. The friends were people that were just doing something different. So
Sure.
that's how I made some of my closest friends now, is that we were reacting. And I think this is kind of socially common. There's like a dominant spectacle. And if you're impressed by it and interested in it, then you stay at the main stage, you
Right.
stay in that room. But then if you're not, if you're either bored by it or just bugged by it or impatient with it or sickened by it, you leave and, find an underground club. And so
There's
that's what
always
I
an
did.
alternative, right? Yeah.
There's always an alternative.
Yeah.
Exactly. The word alternative, right, sort of
Yep.
comes up around that period to describe music. And there was a lot of Dave Matthews was getting off the ground. There were all these other bands around like Pavement. And
Hmm.
so that was also a big influence on, moving away from the
Hmm.
bros.
So what year are we talking about that the jeans incident happened?
That was 87. It was the fall right when I got
So
there.
you were a freshman.
Um,
And did you stick
yeah,
out the 4 years there, or did you feel like transferring?
I stuck out the 4 years. Even I called my mom so often to say, I've got to transfer. Like these people are terrible. I mean, I have a part in that, which is, I had traveled a lot and I just felt like out of place there. But I did stick it out there. I complained often to my mom and said, like, I really should transfer, but I just didn't. And I ended up with at least one of the greatest professors of my life, which is the pragmatist philosopher Richard Gordy, who still serves as like a North Star for me. So
Hmm.
in my Substack, I write a lot about philosophy and refer often to Rorty's work.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I would never have committed to classes. I never would have
Right.
questioned my own beliefs. If I
Right.
had stayed at Dartmouth or gone to Penn,
Yep.
I wouldn't have put pressure on my own beliefs. I wouldn't felt like I had to make sense of them or deconstruct and reconstruct them. And Rory became a huge part of that. So the person that I podcast with now, Stephen Metcalf, was also a student of Rory's, and we met there. So a lot of things came out of that. It just felt like a very fertile, interesting time to be alive and be a thinker in the world.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that's what college kind of does, though. It makes you sort of find yourself in some way, or find that you can't find yourself in some regards too,
Yeah.
politically and
It helps. It
socially.
also helps to have to define yourself against something, to
Sure.
just like have a hard stop
Yep.
of once I saw the men in Madras pants, I was like, oh, okay, this is where this leads. And I can't, if that's the end point of quote conservative thoughts, I thought that when I went down there, conservative meant we'd be like studying Greek and Latin and being very polite. But when I got down there, it was like, anti-gay and and lynching imagery and date rape. And for me, it was like people should be more proper and they should be like they have a more classical education and be less political. And then it turned into, this experiment in bigotry that was not where I wanted to go.
Well, it was also not fair to the denim industry.
It was totally not fair. I mean, come on, the Gap was just getting off the ground. They were expecting big sales that weekend. Instead, yeah, instead
Poor,
nothing.
yeah,
And
poor Jordash. I
poor
mean,
Jordash, exactly. Well, we still had our 501s. I remember and miss every day the pair that I wore that day. Perfect 501s that I could probably
historic.
never
Those are
fit in.
historic, though. It
They're
changed your.
historic.
You
I
should frame
know.
that. If you had them,
Where
you'd
did
frame them.
if I had them, right?
Yeah.
But of course, I probably just left them in a dorm room somewhere.
All right. So you finished Virginia, UVA,
Yep.
and what's the next stop for you?
I went to Harvard for graduate school. I did English and philosophy as my majors, and then a French minor. That's where the pretension comes in. And and then I ended up deciding that I wanted to do English. I think maybe that was just like I had my 10,000 hours in that because I had grown up with it, and I was really drawn to critical methods, like a particular kind of critical thinking about literature that still informs my work now. So I applied to a bunch of places. Harvard was the best place I got in. So I went to move to Cambridge with a boyfriend who was in a band, and we brought like some Charlottesville spirit. I stayed there for 2 years and I was exhausted. I'd just been in school straight, and Harvard was incredibly demanding, way more than UVA. You know, UVA, it wasn't that hard to be the best student in the program. At Harvard, it was very hard to be the best student in
Yeah.
the program. And so I was like on my heels a bit. And then I moved to New York to live with a friend after the sort of master's part of the program. I just was at sea. I didn't know what to do. And I loved going to New York. So I moved in with this friend and I took a job at a bookstore. Racing forward a little bit, someone came into the bookstore who later became a friend and saw that I was reading a book about journalism. The bookstore was open really late. It was open till 3 a.m.
Hmm.
We had so many shoplifters.
Oh,
It was in the East Village. It's just like, I don't know, people were pretty punk who came in, and it was like just a weird scene. Anyway, he came in late at night. I was reading a book about the journalist Janet Malcolm by her. And he said, "Oh, you know what? You should think about going to the New Yorker where she writes because they're looking for a fact checker."
hmm.
And I had never thought about doing journalism. I just thought, like, I'll try to write poetry, maybe novels, maybe I'll work in the arts. But I really didn't think journalism. I don't know what I thought of it then, but I hustled and just went to the New Yorker and talked to someone there, and they indeed needed a fact checker. So they gave me a trial run. Fact checking is, well, now everyone, I guess, knows what it is, but it was invented at the New Yorker as a way of, so if copy editing is to editing, what fact checking is to reporting. So the
Right.
editor looks over a piece and does this big pass on it. Copy editor comes in and double checks that the editor has caught everything. And the reporter does this big sweep of going everywhere, talking to everyone. And the fact checker comes in as a kind of sweeper to be sure they didn't miss anything.
That position doesn't
So,
exist anymore, I assume.
no, that is solidly in place at the New Yorker.
No, I was just
Right.
thinking in the world.
Over the internet.
Facts don't
Yeah.
matter. Yeah.
Facts clearly, right, have
Yeah.
lost their allure. But and I did that for a year, and that introduced me to a whole new way of thinking about everything. I loved the job. I loved the people. They seemed not just like incredibly smart, like the people I had known at Harvard, but they seemed so dynamic and so involved in the world, and also just really funny and less neurotic. And those people are still my friends. I've retained very few close friends from Harvard, but from UVA and that first job at the New Yorker, those are my, people that I have regular reunions with, and they were great. And that the whole job was fascinating. I could go on and on. It was just really, really great time to be in journalism. But I like my two foes in life are perfectionism and procrastination. So that sounds great that I'm against procrastination, and maybe it sounds okay that I'm against perfectionism. But the fact is, I kind of think if it's worth doing badly. So I just like, and I hate an unfinished project. And my degree at Harvard was unfinished. And I just was like, I'm just going to go up there. The deadline is the muse. Just going to set a deadline for myself, get the dissertation done, even if it's filled with typos, even if it's bad. I'm just going to get it over the finish line because I will go crazy if I have this over my head. I don't know.
Sure.
It's still true that like my Substack has so, as my son who's 20 always tells me, has so many typos in it, and it is entirely because I live in fear of saving something as a draft.
Hmm.
I just have to get it out there in the world off my desk, even if it's like filled with mistakes.
Wow.
And if I start to think, oh, I need to make this more perfect, I know that that is going to kill me. So anyway, yeah, so the things that I make are way more sloppy than they are, well worked on, because the worst possibility is some like the dread writer's block. And the only guard against that is like just to think of writing like these are emails, you're just writing them in the world. Anyway. So I felt I needed to get the dissertation done. I moved back to Cambridge or to Boston, and I put a bit of distance between me and the program by seeing friends in Boston more than in the program. And I did the teaching component with a fellowship. So I taught for various professors, and I really liked that. I liked the students a lot. And then I pounded away on the dissertation. But fortunately, I could work on the dissertation in New York because I could use, at the time, Columbia's library had exchange privileges with Harvard. So I could use that. And I finished when I was back in New York, at the same time supporting myself by writing jokes for MTV.
Whoa. That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, how did you get that gig?
Crazy. I don't exactly remember who made the first call, but the person I mentioned earlier, Mike, the guy from the ice cream shop, my friend, we wrote this comic novel together, and in 2003, 5, published it, called The Underminer. And also we were writing a bunch of one-man shows, sort of comedy shows that he performed, and directing them in downtown.
Wow.
in New York City. Yeah, they were just like lunatic things. They were just so weird and fun. And he's done a lot with some of that since. But one of the characters we created was this underminer voice, who's this friend that just slowly destroys your life. And by pretending to be, it's sort of frenemy before they named frenemy. So I was writing comedy and doing comedy and meeting a lot of comedy people. And at some point, someone was like, you should go, because they don't have enough. There's no women in the writer's room in this particular part of MTV. So it was there was some behind the music. There was this show called Evolution. There were shows that were like 100 greatest, like clip shows, like 100 greatest one-hit wonders, or 100 shortest rock and roll marriages. That was me. And Sugar Ray, so Mark McGrath, is that his name, was the guy that I wrote for a lot, but then also a few other VJs. Yeah, so we just wrote jokes, or we wrote like material to fill in.
That's amazing that they would have comedy. I mean, because the MTV's not a comedic place per se, and that's amazing that you would have a comedic writer, and specifically comedic writer.
It was more like patter, like writing patter.
Yeah.
Like the little grid we put things on was measured in seconds. So you had to like, some of the things were just, and now we need to talk about Britney Spears. But some of them right. So it wasn't like very much comedy.
Got it.
Oh yeah, there was one thing, I think it was for Chuck Berry. It was like when people, it was about scandals, right? So it was like when people found the film that Chuck Berry had taken in women's bathrooms, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. pretty good.
That's pretty good.
I don't know that it made it past the producers, the brass, but I was pretty into that one. Um, there were a couple others like that I remember being proud of, but otherwise it was it's like pretty pro forma.
That's really very cool.
One of the MTV shows was about Matthew Shepard's murder in Wyoming, and we got an Emmy nomination for that.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool. That was I've had a few more brushes with TV, but that was the TV period.
Well, I mean, you're well-rounded, clearly, but that's very different than I was expecting to hear. Honestly, I mean, I think of where you're at now, and I certainly don't think MTV, but
right.
But that's great, and that, you know, again, that's living life and experiencing it, right?
I think maybe, you know, in today's terms, like going to work at a Viacom property like VH1 or MTV felt sort of like if you went to work at Facebook. It was just like this big place that was employing, like, as you say, I can't believe there were that many of us who were writing patter like that,
Right.
you know, and being paid well to do it. They were just hiring, and they were hiring all kinds of people. Some of the places that I wrote for, like Glamour, don't exist anymore, and yet seemed like they were indomitable, like they would never end, and they were just cash cows for everyone.
Wow.
And that's how Viacom felt then.
All right. You are finish your dissertation, I assume.
Yes, while working in New York. It has typos in it, but I'm proud of it. It passed, and I got my degree. And fortunately, by then, I had sort of pulled together a career in journalism. And at some point, because I had worked in TV and I had this academic background, the editor of Slate, who has like really been an incredible mentor to me, Jacob Weisberg, at the time thought that it was kind of funny that I had done this, like, you know, they used to call it like high-low, like high culture, low culture thing where, you know, I had this degree, but I also was just writing like goofy stuff for TV. So he asked if I wanted to do TV criticism for Slate, which was a new online magazine owned by Microsoft. This is the end of the 90s, and I didn't know exactly what that would entail, but so I met with him. I had some ideas about how I was going to do it, and he took me on, gave me a chance. And that was the first time since I was a kid on the proto-internet. That was the first time I was writing for the internet, and I got that taste again, just blammo in the face, got the like underground voice of the internet. So in the comments sections, so the first piece I wrote about Rosie O'Donnell, people were like, "You're an idiot." Like one of them was, "Does your mother have any children who don't have brain damage? I pity you." That was one of the things someone said. I don't know if they were defending, or I can't remember exactly what was on the table. Clearly not very much, but you know, it was just like that way that people spout off in comments and on YouTube videos and on the internet generally that we all now know and love. But I just was reminded of how bruising it could be. You know, the New Yorker had been pretty gentlemanly, but I also didn't mind it. And what was amazing to me is that I thought Jacob, my boss, was going to hate it. He would be like, "Oh, people were critical." But no, he was like, "You have 500 comments. This is fantastic." So I was there for a long time. And then that ultimately turned into a job writing about television for the New York Times. And I was there for 8 years, 4 of them in the arts section, writing about television. So doing many, many television reviews a week. And the next 4, just as internet video was appearing before YouTube, but just as there was starting to be interesting video online, I went to the magazine and wrote a weekly column basically about internet culture. So that was 2008 to 2012.
Lotsofmaps.com. Vintage, local, national, and world maps for an affordable price. 99% of our maps are $25 or less. Great as gifts. Frame them or put them under glass for your home, vacation home, or as a memory of a special place. Lotsofmaps.com.
So while I was writing about internet culture, I was, as you say, pretty early to that. So I started to get a lot of offers to do speaking gigs.
Hmm.
Um, and those were advising and all kinds of people about what to make of social media, what to make of the internet. And that was like the Times doesn't like people doing too much of that. So I was sort of trying to thread that needle. At the same time, I was sort of surprised by my then husband's desire for divorce. And so at some point, I realized I needed more money than I was making at the Times. The Times is a little bit of labor of love. I mean, it was a very nice salary, but it wasn't enough to support me and my kids
Hmm.
on my own. I also was hamstrung from taking the speaking gigs because of ethics requirements at the Times
Hmm.
or worries about whatever conflicts of interest. So I was offered a job at Yahoo News covering politics in 2012. And that again was like another Viacom thing, where it
Hmm.
was just a complete windfall. So there were these huge institutions like Harvard that gave me a stipend of $12,000 a year to live on. And then the New York Times, which was a nice salary, but wasn't as much as I could make somewhere else. And then there are places like Viacom and Yahoo that just could throw money at people. So
Right.
I wanted to get in the way of that like neolib heyday period. And so in 2012, like the city was coming back after the financial crisis, and there was suddenly money around, and there was investment in Yahoo. So I went to Yahoo News, and I was able to, with just like a huge salary, was able to pay for the divorce, was able to care for my kids by myself. I was just very, very proud of having worked that out. They wanted me to cover politics, and I had written about politics at the Times, digital politics, but now they wanted that to be my exclusive focus, and that was the Romney Obama 2012
Hmm.
election. So I covered that, and yeah, and then a lot of other politics around the period. Really interesting to be there, really interesting to have this huge audience that was then, it was declining, but it was sort of the last era where, like, you know, you had really millions of eyeballs on any time you wrote something because it was people's homepage. Yahoo.com
Right.
was a lot of older people's homepage. So that was super fun. And I covered the RNC in Tampa. Back at the New York Times, I had done like a fair amount of celebrity profiles when I was writing about television at the art section. So I had already started to travel and, meet stars and stuff. But Yahoo was more, I was more reporting on politics. So I liked, and I like that better. They're
Hmm.
just like doing celebrity profiles is just completely humiliating experience, where you're like just shunted around and only given a little bit of time with the person. And
Yeah.
by the end, you're like, I didn't even care about this person anyway, and I'm being made to feel like a courtier, and I hate it. But the political stuff was more exciting to report on, and I worked there for 2 years. There were some downsides, but anyway. And while I was there, I was also able to save enough money that I could finally, and this, I sort of did this like I did my dissertation. So by now I have the dissertation, which is book length. That was on finance and fiction, the dissertation. And the book with Mike Albo, which was The Underminer, this comic novel. And I had to like carve out times to just be writing, which I did with around MTV. And earlier I had done the book with Mike. And then I really wanted to do a book based on the columns that I had written at the New York Times about tech. And that became Magic and Loss. It's called Magic and Loss, the Internet as Art, that deals with the aesthetics of the internet, basically the sensory emotional components of online life. And that came out in 2016. So in
Fantastic.
2016, I had finished that with the Yahoo salary. I had started to freelance for places like Politico and Wired and all kinds of magazines. it's actually somewhat embarrassing when I see the list because there's just no place that I said no to. I would just like write for anywhere in that period because I was trying to finish the book. So 2016, I go on a book tour. During the book tour, that was very cool. It was all over the country and then some places abroad. I started to get like a chilling feeling that there was more support for Trump than I thought there was. And I had written the book, split my optimism about the internet. That's the magic part. And then some sense of grieving about what had been lost by the internet. That's the lost part. And I think I was only dimly aware in my peripheral vision that Facebook especially had just been was like this hacked and broken place where there was increasingly misinformation, and people who I thought should know better were believing things that I was surprised that they were believing, and wasting too much time on like this sort of like nasty approach to Hillary and ignoring what seemed pretty clear to be like a very dangerous situation with the person that was ultimately elected. So my book tour ended conveniently or inconveniently, basically in November. And then we had that election. And I really was like, I had been writing for the LA Times that summer. And the LA Times asked me to come on full time on the opinion page. So I was writing about policy. I was right here in New York, but I was writing for the LA Times. And then I also took a column at Wired, and Wired was about tech and culture, but also overlapped with politics. The LA Times was about politics. And then Jacob Weisberg, my old Slate friend, asked me to come back to Slate to co-host a show called Trumpcast. And I hadn't done any podcasting before that, but once again, he had probably misplaced faith in me that I could do it. And he ended up leaving Slate, so I ended up taking the show over. And basically, I spent the first Trump presidency through the part of the pandemic hosting Trumpcast, doing a monthly column for Wired. Then I also got a monthly column at The Economist, which was mostly on culture, and then a weekly column for the LA Times. And I was just so exhausted because putting together the salary that I had made at Yahoo, God, I left out a Silicon Valley job that happened in there in 2015, which also overlapped with finishing the book. But I'll leave that out. But it did give me a taste of what actual Silicon Valley was like, and commuting to the Presidio in San Francisco from New York with kids in shared custody. It was really fascinating.
Wow.
That was also a giant salary. But it was trying to get these infusions of cash by working for places like Yahoo and this company. And then freelancing, I was just, money's always like one of the major guardrails of your, like structuring principles of how you live in the world. So I was having to just freelance so much in order to make up that much money. But the podcast totally took off and did really well. And I started appearing on MSNBC and CNN as just a talking head, as some of the people trying to make sense of the unthinkable presidency of Donald Trump.
Right.
Then he was defeated, and I breathed a sigh of relief even though, things had been destabilized after January 6th, but it looked like we would have a good, solid, stable president for 4 years. And I was really eager to get out of the trenches with politics and start to talk about culture and tech again. So I had a podcast at Stitcher called This is Critical for a year or two during the pandemic, so early Biden years. And I loved doing it, and we did some great shows, and I loved it, and we had zero audience. Like, I'd like to say that there was a cult following, but it was nothing like a cult following. And, I had been like very used to this like crazy number of downloads from Trumpcast, and now I had to carry it all by myself, and I just couldn't make it work, and I couldn't get any, host read ads and all that stuff. So that ended, and I went down to like only sporadically writing for the LA Times, and then I really made Wired my main home. Oh, and I finished up at The Economist, and Wired was until very recently my complete mainstay place. And I just wrote about tech, and I started doing big feature reporting. So I wrote about TSMC, the chip making factory in Taiwan. I wrote about this giant cool shipping company that took me to Greece. I wrote about AI that took me to Dublin. I wrote about, I finally, like less than a year ago, went to Copenhagen to write about the company that makes Ozempic, which is Novo Nordisk. And that was one of the first times writing about biotech. And that was completely fascinating. And I just got to immerse myself in some of the most interesting corners of technology. So like at TSMC, they basically etch on atoms. They make, chips that are so small, they have to etch on them with light, and very cool, making these like tiny transistors. And also how they make Ozempic is really interesting, and the technology behind Ozempic, but also the finances of the company. So those were really good, fun reporting projects. And now we are like almost to the present moment. And then, and then Trump was reelected. So right before I went to Copenhagen for that story, which was imagined as a story that would take place in a fairly, stable geopolitical environment, because I pitched it before the election, ended up taking place it was a week after Trump was elected. And so arriving in Denmark, which Trump was already menacing with his plan to invade Greenland or whatever, they were already anticipating a brain drain from the United States and trying to hire people especially in tech. One funny thing that happened at Novo Nordisk is they were talking about how excited they were to start being able to hire from the US, because most people don't want to leave the US because there's historically been so many great universities here, but they knew the handwriting was on the wall for the Trump destruction of universities. So they were like, we're really excited to get some PhDs here who are going to really, contribute to our economy, and they'll be amazing. And also we can recruit, and we can take advantage of this brain drain. And I was like really loving the time in Copenhagen. So I was like, well, you know what? I have a PhD from Harvard in English. And they were like, yeah, we were talking about scientists. It's like, but you mean my work on John Keats is not actually giving me a job here? They were like, you can stay in the US. Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. We're looking for engineers and business people. So that was a like rude awakening, but whatever. Wired is turned into a freelance contract, having been a more regular staff contract. And because I more wanted to write about politics than tech, at some point during the pandemic, I also started a Substack. So, the model of journalism just keeps shifting, and I sort of like trying to keep up with it rather than just like wish it would go back. And so after Biden was elected, a lot of people, political writers, and then again in another wave after Trump was reelected, left their traditional media posts and started Substacks. And so on my Substack, which is called Magic and Loss, like my book, I just get to do everything that I've described that are my sort of weird eclectic career. So I call it Politics for English Majors, because there are all these humanities majors like me that are never going to get hired by Novo Nordisk because like the economy's gone in a different direction. But we like to write and talk. And so there are a lot of humanities majors. So we take on politics with the tools of the humanities, and basically like address human frailty and all the things that the humanities address themselves to. So there've been lots of good projects on that. And I say we because I work with my now husband, Richard Stanislaw. We do a podcast. The podcast totally self-sponsored, called What Rough Beast, which is about this president. And so Richard works on it with me, producing with Stephen Metcalf, the guy I met and I described as another Rorty student. and Brianna Snyder, who's a wonderful writer who I met because she sent me reader mail when I was at the New York Times. And she was much younger, and she did some assistant work for me and has just become a close collaborator. And so she also works on the show. And we do a certain amount of activism on the Substack. So there's some, slightly more abstract philosophical writing, but we also do profiles of people who are harmed by cuts to Medicare, and also offer up opportunities for political activism, for some kinds of direct action. The Substack often sort of reflects that view. And I think people appreciate it for that. So it has a really nice following in it. And I'd say it's, maybe 2/3 of my salary now is that. And then the other part is at the New Republic, where I had never written for them before. And they asked me to write something, and I've written lots of columns for them. And then one big reported piece recently on the Big Ten and the response of the Big Ten conference to cuts or the attacks on universities by Donald Trump. That project was really interesting. And then I've just written tons of columns about politics for them, including most recently, it's about the enhanced games. Do you know what those are?
No. Oh,
okay,
I do. Yes.
Yes.
Where they are allowed to do whatever they want.
They're pro doping. They're
Right.
pro doping. So, having worried so much about whether women, whatever the testosterone levels of people in women's sports, they used to worry about them. Now they promote it. So everyone can juice however much they want, however many anabolics they want to take at whatever cost to their own bodies. And this is a Peter Thiel Don Jr. project and a MAGA project. And it's essentially just to test on some of the greatest athletes in the world at great cost to their bodies, their minds, their records, their reputations, test drugs on their bodies. And the drugs are incredibly dangerous, as we all know, lead to just problems in every part of your life, including increased suicide rates, cardiovascular issues, liver issues, you name it. There's no system of the body that's not affected and hurt by anabolics and by testosterone, excesses of testosterone and all this stuff. And they happen also to be the drugs that Peter Thiel does, that RFK does, that are, muscle mass building. And it's shown really mixed results. And they also pay people a lot to be their swole guinea pigs. One of the swimmers didn't even get his personal clean best after training with every drug to try to beat the world record. It was 2 seconds shy of his own personal record, right? Which he had clean. So It isn't clear that they're getting good performances, but in any case, whatever quote records they're breaking, it's with an asterisk, so they're stigmatized and they'll never make it back to clean sports. Hopefully they'll make it back to their lives alive. It's just incredibly cruel thing to do to athletes. It's like what Putin did at the Sochi Olympics with his athletes who, all doped and cheated, and then won awards that then were stigmatized and they got stripped away from them. And those athletes are never heard from again, and they suffer with disabilities. And it's just exactly what an autocrat does. Is just use Olympic sports in this way to pretend that the country's the greatest in the world, and they end up cheating. The effects on, all of it, on sexual health, everything. I mean, it reflects this larger eugenics agenda that all of them have expressed about living forever, creating humans that are better than all other humans on account of their, quote, genetics or biology, which always ladders up to white supremacy. I'll send you the piece, but it really jibes with some of the darkest things that Peter Thiel is doing right now.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So let's go back to you. So at this current moment, you've got 2 major things going on, correct? With the New Republic as well as your podcast.
Yeah, Substack and podcast. So the Substack has essays and the podcast is the podcast. Yeah.
Great. The energy that you have is just insane. the drive and the want to try new things is just amazing in what you're doing, and you've experienced an amazing amount of things. I mean, you have bounced around in a good way your whole career, and it's amazing how much you've accomplished in that. Let me ask you this: do you feel like you're given the green light to do kind of what you want? I mean, obviously they're going to kind of give you an idea of what they're looking for, but do you feel like you can put your own slant on things and have that freedom to do that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I see myself as pretty eccentric and also opinionated. And
Sure.
when I think about media suppression, well, I know it exists, and the Jimmy Kimmel thing is real, and Karen Attiah firing at the Washington Post, and all kinds of other events like that.
Hmm.
I still have never felt remotely hamstrung in what I write,
Yeah.
either on Substack or at the New Republic.
That's
The
good.
New Republic is just a great experience in journalism.
Hmm.
The boss, Michael Tomasky, is someone I've known a long time, and he is just an incredible editor and just so easy to work with. And, there's a real all hands on deck feeling for the left and for liberals. Centrists seem very anxious and neurotic, but I think the left is a little more unified
Yeah.
in kind of handling this emergency. And the New Republic has really, I think, risen to that challenge. So anyway, I do not ever feel that anything I'm trying to write is curbed or any part of my voice is curbed.
Well, and you
either.
must feel blessed by that, because I would imagine the majority of journalists are sort of held under a microscope to some degree.
There is a hard line between reporting and editorial, and I'm definitely on the editorial side. I heard a friend put it this way. She said she wears her politics like a Celtic tattoo.
Yeah.
And I sort of feel like I just did that pretty early on.
Sure.
And so I don't know how much, when I do straight reporting, like about Novo Nordisk or about this shipping company or about AI, I don't know how much the companies, before they let me in, take into account my leftist politics. I'm not sure, but I never write about anything that you'd be required to bite back an opinion.
Right.
So, for instance,
No softball questions or.
yeah. So, for instance, but when I'm writing about Ozempic, right, there is, I guess, a quote progressive position that about changing your body. But I think if you'd looked at my past work, one thing that I kind of am that is cuts against the grain of leftism sometimes is very pro-tech.
Right.
So I think when I deal with tech companies, they usually expect that I'm not going to say, oh, people should diet and exercise, right? As opposed to, or that I'll have some like reflex to dislike the new. I like the future.
Yep.
I like the future. And so that could be a potential political position that might come into play in some of the straight reporting I do. But as for just the kind of flat-footed or you red or blue thing, I just make it very clear which side of that divide I'm on. I just don't give MAGA any quarter. I don't split any differences.
And I imagine people know what they get when they're hiring you.
That's it.
Yeah.
The Celtic tattoo thing comes in handy.
Right. But let's say you're a junior reporter. They're not looking for your opinion per se, right?
Yeah. It's once again, it's a little complicated now because the internet just sloshes with everything all the time. So there's not the hard boundaries that there used to be between what was called the newsroom at the New York Times. So that's the report. That's like the A1 story, the stories in the front section of the New York Times. You can recognize these kind of stories because they come from reputable sources. They're really expensive to produce.
Mm-hmm.
So which is, I guess, something readers don't understand, is that you can't do a reported piece for Substack on your own steam, because often you need to have photography. Like if you look at the foreign reporting in the New York Times, just someday pick up the paper,
Mm-hmm.
Boston Globe, but especially the Times, because they still have a lot of foreign bureaus. There's a photograph, say, of Gaza. To get that photograph in Gaza, you often need bodyguards, you need armored cars, you need a photographer, you need people with the photographer. In the old days, you need film, you need incredible cameras, you need a real education. The person needs to have a real education in photojournalism.
Yeah.
There need to be translators also that go along. Sometimes
Right.
they're in sort of a bodyguard role, sometimes not. Sometimes they're like bigger guys that take sound or do other stuff that also serve to kind of protect the reporter. In Iraq, the Times reporters themselves carried guns. So you need that needs to be licensed, and it needs to be, sometimes they're embedding with the army. All of that is incredibly expensive.
Yep.
Then back at home, they need to develop film or at least, look through the film that comes out, and nothing can be doctored or, in a way that would not stand up to scrutiny. So all the cropping and the colors and everything has to be as true to life as possible. And then the caption has to be written, and there's all layers of fact checking and copy editing around the caption. That's just the caption.
Yeah.
Then there's the writing itself, often needs more than one reporter, more than one byline. All these people have huge educations and history in it. They do language training. The people running the bureaus have to learn Arabic, or they have to learn Japanese. And it all amounts to just an incredible operation just to turn out one piece,
right?
Let alone an investigation, which requires months and months of cultivating sources and, trying not to burn bridges and trying to keep a low profile so that you're not beat by another newspaper.
Yeah, right.
All of that stuff happens in reporting. And if you're a junior reporter who's looking to do that, it is an incredibly athletic, demanding, incredibly cool way to operate. It takes a lot of patience.
Yep.
The people I know who do it really well, like David Kirkpatrick, who's at the New Yorker now. David was the person who ended up bringing me on at the New Yorker way back in the 90s. So a lot of this is one big circle of people. He told me that the reason he didn't do opinion writing is that he never really has known what he thinks about things. And I said, well, the reason that I do opinion and not what he does, which is amazing, is that I never want to leave my house. I just want to sit around and tell people what to think. And I always know what I think. And so we were sort of laughing about that, but it just sort of I had to be home with the kids, and I also was like very used to writing online and used to reading and writing, in tandem. And so I tried to make a virtue of that, where David Kirkpatrick made a virtue of letting himself be like Socrates, like knowing nothing, like, oh, teach me about this.
Right.
Which is also a just beautiful way to proceed.
Sure. That's kind of what I do, actually. I walk into some of these circumstances and not know a thing. And it is kind of cool. It's a full education for sure.
Absolutely. And I do like addressing the world that way. I feel like more anxious at doing reporting in the world than I do, sitting at home. But just economically, the thing that I would want to make people aware of is that there's another kind of reporter who maybe comes from, like Frank Rich is like this, who ended up helping to create Succession, the TV show. But he was at the Times as a theater critic. So he's a critic, like I was with books. And then he turned into a politics op-ed person, like I did. And at no time was he doing much other than celebrity profiles. He's never like going to go to a war zone or go down to DC and ask hard questions. Like, that's just not what that person does. So if you are an observer by nature, if you're regularly sort of outraged or just deeply curious about things, there's like one thing I consume a lot of is perfume TikTok. So like perfume talk. And there are just so many young people who are like just obsessed with scents. And they are like just very good at understanding how fragrance works. And if you're that kind of person and you're like that kind of fragrance critic or like a music critic, one of my kids does a ton of music criticism. And you know it if you are it. Like if you're an art critic, you can make a huge amount of sense of the arts. That's the kind of position you might take. And it's interesting that that's called journalism.
Right.
Because it's not quite, right? You have much more license to say what you think. It's also very cheap to produce.
Right.
It's pretty much what we're all doing all the time on Facebook or on X or on Instagram stories. Anytime someone turns a camera on themselves on TikTok and is like, so let me break down the Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ezra Klein showdown the other day. Here's what happened.
Yeah.
Y'all, but there's in the business, there's just a huge differential in the investigative work, the foreign reporting, the reporting generally, that's incredibly expensive, incredibly labor intensive. No one can do it on their own. And nobody is writing that stuff for Facebook.
Right.
It's too much. It's like the Hope Diamond, compared to like some glass beads. And the glass beads are all over the internet. This other kind of reporting that is so intensive and also it's so alive making. When I've hung out at the bureaus, I lived in Japan for a while. When I hung out at the Tokyo Bureau, or when I've hung out with foreign reporters, they're what we think of when we think of journalism.
Yeah, right.
Just like you idolize them, and they speak all these languages. And so I just don't want to mistake one thing for the other.
Yeah.
Those reporters would never want to have an opinion. Right. Because when you're traveling, you like need to go into a place where you're like, oh, that guy like makes his wife wear a burqa. That doesn't look that cool. But like, you don't have 1,000 opinions about it.
Right.
You just are there to be open and receptive, Socratic, just this could take me anywhere. And that's how I feel about tech.
Yeah.
When I go to a tech company, the politics mostly disappear. And I'm just open, like confronting the world.
Yeah.
And that's what those guys do. So it's actually not very common that you cross streams in your brain,
right. Well, and I guess the point is that there's a place for everyone as far as what they want to contribute and what they don't. You're more of an opinion writer, but you don't have to be an opinion writer to be a writer.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah. And there's also art, right? So what I first wanted to do, which is poetry and novels. And those are the things that I now consume. The same way David said, he doesn't have an opinion. And the same way I say I'm probably too homebound to do reporting full time. There are people who can write novels, and they're my heroes too. I can't write fiction to save my life. Okay. But I read it all the time. I just like gobble it. It sustains me. And so you might also be a person that wants to write fiction or poetry.
Right. What is your typical day, and how do you organize your writing as far as, shutting out the world so that you can concentrate on this project you're working on?
So I have noticed that like the young are very open to neurodivergence, and I probably, like everyone, have spent a little bit of time trying to diagnose myself. I wouldn't jump to any diagnosis, but I definitely show the hallmarks of like ADD or even some version of autism. So, and I just go with it, not against it. Sure. So the day looks very scattershot. So like I have the briefest way to say it is I have 1 million tabs open on my computer, so many that they like run into each other and you can't read what's on any of the tabs. And my kids sometimes say that my whole life is just opening tabs. So they'll just be like tabs. There was a paper I was reading yesterday on assassinations that was written in the 80s about profiles of assassins because I was trying to understand Charlie Kirk's person. There's like a Reddit thread about perfume. There's TikTok where I'm watching the evolution of people's arguments about Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates. There's 2 different documents where I'm writing things. Wow. Like for the Substack. Very simply, in the morning, I do Duolingo for French. I tried to do it for Irish because I wanted to like learn something new and I just couldn't get anywhere with it. So I'm doing Duolingo for French, and then this app called Imprint that like offers short philosophy classes, which I find very rewarding, enriching. Then I go for a short walk with an audiobook. So right now it's Careless People, the book that came out a couple of years ago about Facebook, but it's often a novel. Then come home and have like a late breakfast, early lunch, which is like whatever it is, and then get to my tabs. And then it's just tabs, tabs, tabs.
Wow.
Like right now I'm brooding on what my next pitch to the New Republic is going to be. And I'm between maybe writing about this TikTok person that answers 24 hours a day live and seems to answer questions or take calls from people who support Trump. And he's just like, why do you support him? And he's just this young guy. And I don't understand how his day is organized, because it seems to be that he 24 hours is manning the phones.
Right.
So I was thinking of maybe writing about him. Yeah, so I might pitch that, or I'm trying to decide if there's another story that I want to pitch, and watching news as it breaks.
Sure.
And then I might have a podcast interview scheduled. Those I do also in my house and just have a setup here. And then in the afternoon, I take a long walk. I either walk with a friend, usually, or my husband, and often spend that time talking about, ideas that could feed back into work, test out ideas, hear their ideas. I have a bunch of friends who are politically active, so we strategize during those walks.
That's
Those are
great.
sort of meetings. Or if I'm by myself, I listen to an audiobook, and that's it. But the scrambled tabs time is probably impossible to retrace how I get that many tabs open and what they're all doing. So I guess it's like what the ADD crowd calls hyperfocus.
Yeah. Let's talk about physical doors. I mean, are you literally locking yourself in a room and saying, don't bother me for the next 3 hours? Do you need that kind of...
No, that's the other thing. Is I think this might be a small apartment in New York / motherhood. So
right.
I am totally fine, and actually have always been, with having other people around. I just somehow have natural noise canceling headphones. I just start to fall into a hole of working, and they can just do whatever they want around me.
Amazing.
I don't have an office of my own. I just sit on the sofa in the living room where I am right now.
Some advice for somebody. Now, obviously, times have changed since you have started your career. Physical magazines and newspapers are kind of gone. Is there some sort of advice that sort of spans the generation and technology that would stick in all generations that you might be able to give?
I would say caution is your enemy. So excesses of, am I ready for this? Can I do this? Should I try this? Is it perfect yet? Should I send it out? Should I have AI help me on this? All those questions seem like a warning sign that you are overthinking and probably just send it out. Prepare yourself for rejection and fear perfectionism, because it leads to procrastination. And also, some people like to think that there are writers who work their whole lives and then just write one, or never publish, and they write one jewel of a book, or one jewel of a collection of poetry. But one thing I learned when I was studying American literature is there are very, very, very few unprolific writers. Most writers just write a ton, and a lot of it is subpar and some of it is great. So I just think huge amounts of production is maybe the way to go. And then the other thing is just your writing is like a huge pleasure, almost a compulsion in people who do it. And if it's that for you, you will know where it feels best. So where you feel freest writing. For David Kirkpatrick, the reporter, he ran the Middle Eastern Bureau and lived in Egypt and raised his kids in Egypt, because he just felt amazing when he was out in the world and seeing things with his own eyes and receiving things with all his senses and trying to make sense of it without getting in his own way. And I felt really happy first writing poetry and then writing critical essays that let me feel like I could see through what was being told to me and help other people see through it and help other people keep their heads in what felt like stormy times. And that felt like just incredibly liberating to me. The same way that I felt maybe guiding a friend or listening to a friend while I felt like she was freer than she thought she is. And sometimes pointing out the freedom or pointing out the hope was something that I really loved doing, and I love doing it in my work. some people say go where it's warm. So you feel drawn to one kind of writing and the other kind of writing feels like pulling teeth, then you know which one to go toward. Now,
Right.
none of this is very good about building a career, but as you're finding your voice, you may also find your medium. So are some journalists who turned out to be surprisingly good at blogging and then turned out to be surprisingly good at video. But not everyone did, right? So some people really just do not want to turn the camera on themselves and do video. I've just started doing video and I never thought I would, putting it up on Substack because people like a visual medium now.
Yeah.
I know I do. But you might find yourself as an op-ed writer, there are tons of people on TikTok and Instagram who are somehow able to metabolize news, like let's say the Kirk assassination or the government shutdown, and put it in perspective of the world they come from. Like in a small way, maybe you're someone that went to high school with the suspected assassin of Charlie Kirk, or you went to high school with Charlie Kirk. Those people emerge almost instantly on TikTok, or you worked at Turning Point USA, and then you have your story to tell right there on TikTok. Or in a larger way, you're someone who studied sociology and you understand how the right wing organizes online, and then you make your TikTok and it's like a gift to the world because no one knows that space. You know, there are people who know a lot about sports who weigh in on the enhanced games or weigh in on the Big Ten conference in ways that are completely illuminating because it's from their corner of the world.
Right.
So that's another wonderful place to start. And you know it when you feel your medium. You know it if you're like really somehow good with the camera. I don't even know where to look. I'm just never that good at figuring out how much to use my hands or like whether to wear makeup. But there's some people who seem to have a natural feel for it. And then similarly with podcasting, and it's like a game of hot or colder, right? You just go toward what's warm and avoid what's cold for you. Celebrity profiles, just didn't like doing them. Some people love them. Some people are so good at celebrity profiles, but you really feel it in your body, where you feel freest, where you feel most yourself, where you feel like your voice is most liberated. You find your voice, you find your happy place, your flow, and then you find your medium, and then ideally you find your career.
That's great advice for really any career, honestly. And to break down what you just said, do your passion,
Absolutely.
Do what you know and follow your passion. That's a huge word here on Occupations. The folks that I have interviewed over the years, and knowing that the majority of them have been successful people, all of them are passionate about what they do. And I agree. I think it's find what makes you the happiest and what you know the best.
Yeah.
And do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also true that you can't help but follow your passion. So even if you're not doing it as your day job, there may be some secret thing where you're like, all I really like doing is watching tennis or reading about perfume. And then that could be your thing.
Sure.
You shouldn't have to look very hard to find it.
Right.
Like if you're taking too many personality tests to be like, what is my passion? What is my passion? You could be ignoring the fact that you like taking pictures of yourself near big things, for instance.
Who would do that?
Which is an awesome passion.
That's crazy. Well, maybe your passion is taking personality tests.
That's true. That's true. Maybe it is. I've taken plenty in my time, especially to find my signature scent.
There you go. What is your signature scent?
Personality.
What is your signature scent, by the way?
I think it is becoming African rooibos, which is a really amazing new tea scent.
Huh.
Just putting that out there.
All right.
What's yours?
Meatloaf. I don't know.
Meatloaf.
The smell of meatloaf.
I wonder if there is a meatloaf accord.
I've never done anything like that, so I have no idea.
Where they make a men's cologne out of it. I bet there is.
Meatloaf? Yeah. Well, there was a singer, Meatloaf. I'm sure he smelled a certain way. So I'm sure they could...
he might have even...
He might have smelled like
I just
meatloaf.
Put meatloaf cologne into Google, and Meatloaf, the singer, performed in Köln, which is Cologne. We call it Cologne in Germany, K-O-umlaut-L-N. And so what came up is Meatloaf, live in Cologne. So I guess that's the closest we'll get to Meatloaf Cologne for you.
I love it. All right. So I'm off to Germany, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Virginia Heffernan, thank you so much for joining me and letting the folks know what a fantastic life you have led, and just incredible. And you are a ball of energy, and clearly you're not at your last stop. I mean, you have a lot more to say to the world, and this is only the beginning of your career. I can tell.
Thank you so much. I love hearing that.
Yeah, thank you.
It's so great to talk to you too.
Thank you so much for joining us on Occupations.
Take care.
Join us again for another episode of Occupations, the podcast, coming up soon.
Occupations has been brought to you by lotsofmaps.com. Please follow Occupations, the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to find information about our next episode or to see what past episodes are available.